Here's a quick tutorial on how to hand embroider the Move Mountains pattern. Go ahead and grab your embroidery hoop, loosen the screw at the top so you can separate the two pieces. Have your fabric ready. I like to use 2 pieces of fabric when using white because it hides the back threads and the knots. I line those 2 up and then I place them on top of that inside hoop, centering it the best I can. I then take the outside hoop, press it down to secure that fabric in there, and then I tighten that screw at the top, and I pull the fabric taut. You want it drum tight. Embroidery floss comes in 6 strands. This particular pattern calls for 3 strands, so go ahead and separate the 6 strands down to 3. And if you haven't done this before, it always feels a little strange and awkward, but once you do it enough, it becomes simple. To thread the needle, I fold the thread over the needle, and then I slide the needle out, and I keep that thread pinched between my fingers, and with the eye up, I just slide it down over the thread. After threading the eye of your needle, go ahead and find the end of your thread, and you want to tie a knot there. I just do a simple overhand knot. You'll see me do it 1 time, and then I do it a 2nd time just to make sure it's secure and doesn't come back up through my fabric. We'll start with the stem stitch first. On the sun rays, I go ahead and come up at the bottom of the pattern on one of those rays. And then I want to go down a stitch length apart. And then we're going to hold a loop out. We're going to hold some of that thread out. We're not going to pull it all the way through. And then we'll come up in the middle of those 2 stitches. And then complete pulling that all the way through, that thread all the way through. And then we're going to go down a stitch length away again. Again, holding that loop out, not pulling it all the way through. And then we'll come up in the middle of those 2 stitches and then complete pulling it through. And we'll just keep repeating that pattern. Also, excuse my hands. I promise they aren't dirty, so don't troll me for that. Every time before I film a tutorial, I end up doing something outdoors in the garden. The first video I ever did, I had picked mulberries the day before, so my hands are stained. I am not dirty, I promise. When you want to finish a thread, you've come to the end and you need to tie it off, I just flip my hoop over and go to the closest last stitch, and I just do a simple knot. I run my needle underneath, and then I catch that loop before it closes. And you can do that once or twice, and then I nip the little tail off. Now it's time to do the satin stitch on the shadowed part of the mountains. I come up through the top of that mountain, and then I line it up vertically, and this will help keep my stitches straight inside of that pattern. It's up to you how you want to fill it in. This is just my preference. And then I'll go ahead and fill in the right side. I'm just going to come down a little bit from that top stitch following that pattern. And then I'll come down right next to the bottom of that first stitch. And I'll keep repeating this pattern, just coming down a little ways. And you're going to see gaps, and that's okay because we'll end up framing it in with the whipped back stitch. So you won't see those gaps once we're finished. I'm almost finished with that right side. Once I'm done filling in the right side, I will go ahead and move over to the left and continue to finish filling in that space. I'll show you a few more stitches and then I'll go ahead and fast forward through the rest of it. Now it's time to start the back stitch, which will eventually turn into the whipped back stitch. Go ahead and come up through your pattern and then go down a stitch length away. Come up a stitch length away from your last stitch, and then you'll go back down into the previous stitch. And you'll continue that throughout the whole mountain range. I chose to work one mountain range at a time so I wouldn't have to switch colors of thread. But I'll go ahead and backstitch the whole mountain. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I backstitched around the satin stitched part of the mountain, or the shaded part of the mountain, just in case some of you feel uncomfortable with that. But I literally just started at the point, as you can see here. And then I started to backstitch around those satin stitches. It feels a little trickier just because your lines are covered up, but it's not too bad. It's pretty simple to follow. I'll do some more stitches and then I'll speed it up, but I'll let you see what it looks like completed. After you have all your back stitching done, this is when you can start whip stitching, or the whipped back stitch. You come up through your fabric and then you take your needle and you run it under the first stitch. And you don't go back down. You're literally going to take your needle and run through the second stitch. And you're just going to keep following your pattern and running your thread on the top of the fabric through each stitch. Occasionally you want to pull your thread a little tight too. And you can see how it really solidifies that line, or that thread line, and frames in your work. I wanted to show you the whipped back stitch at the top of this mountain range also. Yes, it's a little bit trickier with all that satin stitching there, but it's very doable. And as you can see, I'm just following that stitch line, and I'm just being careful not to snag my satin stitches. If you keep finding that you're snagging a lot, you can turn your needle around and use the eye of your needle to go through. I still find I have more control when I'm using the point end of my needle when I'm running through my stitches, but it's up to you. Maybe try both ways if you're finding you're snagging a lot with the point part of your needle. I'll show you quite a few more stitches on this particular section, and then I'll go ahead and fast forward it so you can see what it looks like complete also. This is my preferred way to back my projects. I trim off the edge, leaving about an inch, inch and a half. I trace a piece of cardstock and foam core with the inside of my hoop. I have my finished piece turned over. I lay the cardstock inside, and then I start to tuck that fabric down, and I lightly lay that piece of cardboard or foam core on top, and I start to tuck that fabric in. And once I feel like it's all tucked in, I just take that piece of foam core and I press it down, and it snaps into place and it's secure. And then you're done. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and please don't forget to subscribe.